Long, long ago, in a land far, far away, people would tell each other stories, tales of myths and legends. So pull up by the fire and let me tell you a tale from somewhen else. The Greek gods, they were vengeful if they were anything. We can repeatedly see this in the Greek epics still told today. If us mortals showed any hubris, arrogance, or pride rivaling that of the gods, this would almost certainly be punished. In some tales, we see the gods as overly sensitive, especially when we look at it with our current society. But the Greek people, they did not question their all-powerful deities. They knew the great Pantheon of Gods must be worshipped, they must be appeased, or else they should be feared. But these stories will show that some humans, they did have hubris. Those thought themselves above other humans and like the gods. Such wicked deeds would see these people sent to Tartarus, a portion of the underworld reserved for ingenious punishments, and others were just punished by the gods. Tartarus was a vast and gloomy place, an expanse of despair, as far below the earth as the earth is below the skies. It was there the Titans, who predated the Greek pantheon, lived through a monotonous and dreary existence, so different than the high esteem that they had once found themselves in. Olympus and Ephialtes, two giant sons of Poseidon, god of the sea, had once tried to scale Mount Olympus with their massive hands, whom had once tried to overthrow the mighty ruler Zeus. They were there amongst those who suffered in Tartarus. Tydeus, an earth-born giant, had insulted Hera, wife of Zeus, ruler of the gods. Zeus, of course, became offended. He flung Tydeus down into Tartarus and set two vultures to bite and gnaw his liver. Zeus would make this dreadful torture last forever. Tantalus was a wise and wealthy king of Lydia. He was a welcomed associate with the gods. He even dined at the same table as Zeus, and Zeus was delighted in his conversation and company. Zeus would listen in interest to his wisdom, his observations, but Tantalus, so full of pride and ego at the position close to the gods, got too comfortable. He used language that Zeus found very uncouth and unbecoming. Not only did Tantalus use this language where Zeus could hear him, he spoke it directly to Zeus himself. Tantalus, he also stole nectar from the gods' own table. He stole ambrosia, fruit of the gods, from the table as well. He would brag about this to his friends, but the greatest crime would be killing his own son, Pelops. Not only that, but then Pelops' remains, they were served at a banquet held for the gods. Why did he do this, you ask? He wanted to test the omniscience of the gods. Zeus, he condemned him for all of this, and he was sent to Tartarus. Tantalus' eternal punishment was a never-ending thirst. He was then submerged up to his chin, and any time he would lower his lips to the water, it would recede. He was unable to quench his own thirst and wet his poor parched lips. Tall trees with sweet and juicy fruit hung above Tantalus. They hung so temptingly above his head that any time he tried to retrieve them, a wind would fly in and sweep them upward, carried just beyond his reach. Pelops, though, he would be resurrected by the gods. There are Greek tales of loving courage that he may be found in. We also have Sisyphus. He was a great tyrant. According to some accounts, he murdered and butchered any traveler who dared enter his dominion on earth. He would hurl enormous rocks and crush these would-be travelers. For his crimes, the gods saw fit to have him roll an enormous stone boulder up a steep hill, a small mountain even. But as soon as he reached the peak, as soon as that boulder touched the summit, it would roll all the way down, back to the plain below, restarting his daily, monotonous, horrible task. Actaeon, he was the king of Sicily. He was allowed to attend the banquet of the gods. He was allowed to attend by Zeus himself even. Actaeon, though, would take advantage of his exalted position. He sought the favor of Hera, Zeus's wife, and Zeus, he is a jealous god. He struck down Actaeon with his great thunderbolts and commanded the messenger god Hermes to deliver him straight to Tartarus. Not just that, but to bind him to an ever-revolving wheel to spin and spin. The Danaïdes, They were the 50 daughters of Deus, king of Argos, and all of them married their 50 cousins, the sons of Aegyptus, and then they had slaughtered those husbands, all except for Hypermnestra. She refused. They did this due to a prophecy given to their father by an oracle stating that his son-in-law would be the one the cause of his death. Their punishment is in the depths of Tartarus. It was to constantly fill a vessel of water, full of water. But of course, this vessel, it was riddled with holes, stopping them from ever completing this useless task. The punishments of Apollo are great, and although the god Apollo was renowned in the art of music, obviously being the patron god of the arts, there were two lessers who had the ego, the hubris, to even think they were the god's equal, if not better. They each challenged Apollo to a musical contest. The first was Marsyas, a satyr. He had picked up a flute that the goddess Athene had abandoned. He would soon learn that the flute would play the most charming of tunes due to having touched the lips of a goddess. Marsyas, too, was a great lover of music. He was much beloved by the elf-like inhabitants of the forests and the glens. In the intoxicating joy and ego of it all, after finding the magical flute, he foolishly challenged Apollo to a contest. Apollo, the god of music, he accepted this challenge. The muses were picked as the judges over this contest. It was also decided that the loser of the musical contest would be flayed alive. Over the course of the contest, both contestants showed equal skill and ability with their instruments. Apollo, though, he would eventually decide to end this, and he began to sing as he played his lyre. This one act would tip the contest into his favor, and he became the victor. Marsyas would be flayed. Obviously, unhappy in his defeat, he suffered the loss. His untimely death caused great despair in the other satyrs and dryads of the forest. They cried for the loss of their beloved Marsyas and wept. Their tears would merge and create a river in the land of Phrygia, which is still known as the River of Marsyas till this day. The other challenger was Pan. Pan was the god of shepherds, so being another god, this doesn't seem too serious. Pan thought he could play his 7-reed flute more skillfully. After all, Pan's pipe was a world-renowned as Apollo's lyre. The contest was had, and Apollo was declared the winner by all of the judges except one, Midas, king of Phrygia. Midas seemed to prefer, in Apollo's own words, the uncouth tones of Pan's pipe than the refined melodies of Apollo's lyre. Apollo was incensed at this, the stupidity and obstinance of Midas. So of course, Apollo punished Midas. He gave Midas the ears of an ass, a donkey. Midas, of course, tried to cover this disfigurement. He visited his barber and tried to hide his hideous ears from his subjects. But the barber, he of course knew what the king was hiding under his hat. After all, he put it on him and styled it. So the barber was lavish with lots of gifts and trinkets and riches from King Midas. He found difficulty in keeping his secret, so he eventually dug a hole and whispered it into it. He covered the hole and returned home feeling lighter since easing the burden's secret. All was for nothing though, because some reeds grew from the spot that King buried his secret, and with this flow of to and fro from the wind, the reeds sang, King Midas has the ears of an ass. And we have the tragic tale of Niobe, daughter of Tantalus, wife of Amphion, king of Thebes. She reveled in the fact that she had 7 sons and 7 daughters. Upon occasion, she would ridicule Leto for having only 1 son and 1 daughter. But that son and daughter, they were Apollo and Artemis, gods. Niobe even went so far as to try to turn the worship of the Thebians from Leto to herself. That is, in the future, the offering should be made to her, because she thought herself better than a mother of gods. The sacrilegious words had barely passed her lips before Apollo called upon Artemis to avenge their mother of this grievous insult. With invisible arrows, Apollo slayed all of Niobe's sons. Artemis, she slayed 6 of the 7 daughters, leaving only the youngest and most cherished to try to seek refuge in her mother's arms. Niobe begged and pleaded to the vengeful deities to leave her one this one last child of hers. But even as she prayed for mercy, an arrow pierced the youngest daughter's heart. Niobe's husband, in the meantime, could not believe what had happened. He ended himself as well, and his lifeless corpse laid beside his favorite son. Widowed and childless, she cried and wailed as she sat amongst the corpses of her family. The gods, they would take pity and turn her to stone. This stone was transported to Sisyphus, a mountain in her native land. It still stands on that Phrygian mountain, still shedding tears. Artemis, goddess of the hunt and the moon, she resented any disregard for her in her worship. We can hear a tale of a remarkable instance of this in the Calydonian boar hunt. Oeneus, king of Calydon, would neglect to include her in the offerings and things that was given up to the other gods, a celebration for the bountiful harvest that this land had just had. Artemis was not happy. Enraged by this, she sent a great boar to the land. This wild boar, of extraordinary size and great strength, wreaked havoc. It wrecked the sprouting grain, destroying the planting fields. The people were on the verge of famine and death. Around this time, Meleager, Oeneus' son, returned home. He had been with his companions, the Argonauts, on a fantastic voyage. But finding his home country on the verge of ruins, he called to his companions. He called on the greatest heroes of the day to help him. Among the most famous of those who offered assistance in defeating this dreadful monster were Jason, Castor, Midas, Telamon, Theseus, and more, such as the brothers of Oeneus' wife, Althea. They joined the hunt as well. Meleager, he also enlisted the quick-footed huntress Atalanta into service. She was the daughter of an Arcadian. He was disappointed at having a daughter and not a son, which was what he had desired. He abandoned her on a hill, all alone. Here she was nursed by a she-bear, and eventually found and raised by a group of hunters. They named her, and as she grew from girl to maiden, she fell in love with the chase. She fell in love with the hunt. Atalanta was not only a great hunter, but she was also renowned for her beauty. She was renowned for her courage. She was, of course, wooed constantly. Woo. But she remained single and celibate. An oracle had warned her of the misfortune that would befall her if she were to marry any of her numerous suitors. Even though many of the heroes objected to the company of a maiden, whether any maiden, or just this one in particular, I don't know. Probably any female, though. Meleager, though, he was in love with Atalanta. He convinced them to let her accompany the hunt. So the valiant expedition soon set out. Atalanta was the first to wound the monstrous boar, but not before two other heroes fell and lost their lives. They continued to track and hunt the beast, and after a long and ferocious encounter, Meleager killed the beast. He would take the hide and the head and present them to Atalanta as trophies of the victory. Meleager's uncles, though, the brothers of Althea, his mother, they were not happy. They wanted spoils as well, and took the hide from Atalanta, said that it was their right, as kin, as family. Meleager was not happy, and in a quarrel which had arisen due to Artemis, still being enraged due to the slight from Oeneus, he slayed his uncles and returned the hide to Atalanta. Althea was not happy, though. She was now angry, and in her grief at the loss of her brothers, vowed vengeance, even against her own son, and unfortunately, the instrument of her revenge was close at hand. You see, at Meleager's birth, the fates had entered the house of Oeneus and pointed towards a piece of wood burning in the fireplace. They declared as soon as that log was fully consumed, the babe would die. So of course, Althea, being a good mother, grabbed a fire poker, got this log out, and she hid it carefully in a chest. This would become her most prized and precious possession. Now in the midst of her own grief at the loss of her brothers, and in her rage, she forgot the love she had for her son, and threw the log into the fireplace. As the log was consumed and became ashes, so too did Meleager's vitality, his vigor, waste away, and as the last of the log became nothing but ashes, Meleager too expired. Althea realized what she had done too late, and she would later take her own life in her despair as well. Eventually, news of Atalanta's skill and courage during the great boar hunt, the great Calydonian hunt, would reach her father's ears. He would then declare her to be his daughter, finally acknowledging his long-abandoned child. But he would also convince her it was time to take a husband. She would concede, but on one stipulation. The suitor must beat her in a foot race, and if the suitor failed, with her great lance, she would put them to death herself. Many suitors would perish in trying to win Atalanta's hand. She wasn't called the swift-footed for nothing, but there was one, though, who loved Atalanta from afar. But he knew how swift of foot she was. He could not win by skill. He would have to win through cunning and guile. So the beautiful and young would-be husband, Hippomenes, would approach and enlist the help of Aphrodite, goddess of love. He would obtain 3 golden apples from a sacred garden of the gods. The golden apples would be tossed down throughout the race, and Atalanta, tempted by the divine fruit, would stop and admire. She would pick them up. And this is the way that Hippomenes would reach the finish line while Atalanta was preoccupied. He would become her husband, but of course, in his newfound happiness, he too failed to show proper gratitude to Aphrodite, and the goddess would withdraw her favor of the newly wedded pair. And of course, Atalanta, she had forgotten about the prediction of doom that was foretold if she was ever to marry. Her and her husband, they would wander into a sacred grove of Zeus. This unsanctioned entry caused Zeus to transform them into lions. The trophies of Atalanta, the hide and tusks of the Calydonian boar, would be displayed in the temple of Athene in Tigre. Eventually, though, they, along with the story, would travel to Rome as nothing more than mere curiosities. So as you can see, or as you have heard, Artemis, she was not an even-tempered goddess. Not only disrespect, but even unintentional slights upon her privacy would be punished. A famous hunter, Actaeon, accidentally happened upon a stream where Artemis was bathing with her attendants. He reached the spot, though, and Artemis splashed him with water at his audacity to approach while she was in such a state. He would be transformed into a stag, and then he was torn to pieces and devoured by his own hunting dogs. In the tale of the Cattle of Admetus, Hermes was the son of Zeus, and Maia, she was the eldest and most beautiful of the 7 Pleiades, or daughters of Atlas. He was born, Hermes, in a cave on Mount Sinai in Arcadia. Even as a babe, he was cunning. He understood information quickly. The cunning was the problem, though. He was a thief even in those early days. Not many hours after his birth, he snuck out of the cave. He did this to steal some of the oxen from his brother Apollo, who at this time was tending to the flocks of Admetus. He got distracted, though. In his theft, he came upon a tortoise. He killed the poor little guy and stole his shell. Poor tortoise. He stretched 7 strings across the shell and created a new type of lyre. He at once began playing such beautiful music. Once satisfied, he placed the lyre, in his cradle, and proceeded in his expedition to where the cattle of Admetus were grazing. Arriving at sunset, Hermes was able to get 50 oxen to leave the herd. He drove them further away, but first, he made sure to place twigs of myrtle under his feet to create sandals. This would cover his footsteps, help him escape detection. But the little rogue, remember, he is but a babe, was seen by an old shepherd named Batas. Batas, he tended to Neleus's flock. King Neleus, king of Pylos. Just a little side info. Hermes didn't want to be discovered, so he offered the old shepherd the finest cow of the herd. Hermes, he may have been born last night, but he was not dim-witted. So when the old shepherd agreed to Hermes' terms, he pretended to leave, and Hermes returned in the guise of Admetus. Hermes, in Admetus' form, offered 2 oxen if Midas would identify the thief who stole 50 of his cattle. Midas was too tempted by the 2 more of the cattle. He immediately spilled the beans. Hermes was unamused and insulted at being lied to, so he turned him into a lump of touchstone with his divine power. Then, Hermes, he would take 2 of the oxen, and he sacrificed them to the other gods, and himself, he's a little full of himself. He hid the remainder in a cave, and put out the fire. He tossed his twig sandals into the river, and returned to Mount Cylon. Apollo, though, he was a god too, and with his all-seeing power, he soon knew who the dirty little thief was. So he went to Maia, Hermes' mother, and accused Hermes of the theft. Demanded restitution. Maia pointed out to the cradle, where Hermes was, quote, asleep, unquote. How could a baby, still in his cradle, commit such a crime? Apollo, he roused the pretend sleeper awake and began to question him. But Hermes played innocent, and in the most naive tone asked what kind of animal cows even were. So now, Apollo took the baby Hermes in his arms and threatened to toss him to Tartarus if he did not confess. It was all for nothing though. Hermes played the innocent baby still, so Apollo took him before their father, Zeus, who was seated in the council chambers of Mount Olympus. The almighty Zeus listened to Apollo's accusations. Zeus looked upon Hermes, and in a stern manner told Hermes to reveal where the cattle were hidden. Hermes, though, still in his swaddling clothes, looked upon his father's grave face and declared, Now do I look capable of driving a herd of cattle? I, who was only born yesterday? I, whose feet are too tender and soft to tread such rough places. Until just a little while ago, I laid asleep upon my mother's bosom. I had never even crossed the threshold of our dwelling. You know I am not guilty, but if you wish it, I will affirm it with the most solemn of oaths. Zeus, he smiled as he gazed at the child before him, the picture of innocence. Zeus could not resist smiling at his cunning, his cleverness, but he knew Hermes was guilty and told Hermes to take Apollo to the stolen cattle. Hermes knew the ruse was up, and he took Apollo to the hidden cave without hesitation. When Apollo was about to drive the stolen cattle back to the rest of the herd, Hermes, almost by chance, touched the chords of his seven-string lyre. Apollo, having never heard music beside his own three-string lyre or Pan's pipe, listened to the melody from this new instrument. Apollo wanted it, he longed for it, and he offered Hermes the oxen in exchange for the shiny new lyre. Apollo also promised Hermes full dominion over flocks, herds, horses, and all the wild animals of the woods and forest. This offer was accepted, and the brothers reconciled. Hermes became the god of herdsmen, while Apollo devoted himself to the art of music. The two brothers proceeded back to Olympus. Apollo, he would introduce Hermes as his chosen friend and his companion, after, of course, making Hermes swear on the river Styx to never steal back the lyre, to never steal his bull, to never invade his sanctuary at Delphi. He then presented Hermes with the Catechas, also known as the Golden Wand. The wand, adorned with wings, was said to be able to unite all beings in love that were once divided by hate. To test this, Hermes threw the wand between the snakes who were fighting with each other. The snakes were no longer angry, but embraced in love. They curled around the wand, which had now resembled a staff with wings, and the snakes, they were permanently attached to it. The wand itself would come to represent power. The serpents, they represented wisdom, and the wings represented the quickness of it all. All qualities that would represent a trustworthy ambassador. Zeus would present the young god with a silver-winged cap, silver wings for his feet, and Hermes would also be appointed herald of the gods, and conductor of shades and souls to the underworld, which was previously done by Hades, the god of the underworld. Here, it seems, Hermes escaped punishment. Hey there! If you made it all the way to the end of this tale, you have many, many thanks from me. Thanks for listening to this story from another time. And if you have a moment, please feel free to like, comment, share, and subscribe. This helps me to know someone is out there listening. Otherwise, feel free to check out other stories and videos on the channel. And one final thank you for listening to this tale from Somewhen Else. Take care and keep safe.